My name is Leo, and I ruined a perfectly good book on purpose. It was a 1922 edition of The Great Gatsby, its spine fragile as a bird's chest. My job was to restore it. Her job was to see if I was any good. She stood in my workshop, a space I usually ruled with the smell of beeswax and old paper, and suddenly the air felt different, thinner. Elara was 46. I knew because I'd looked it up after she first called about the job, my fingers feeling clumsy on the keyboard. Seeing her in person, though, was different. It wasn't about numbers. It was about the way she held herself, a quiet grace that seemed to calm the very dust motes dancing in the late afternoon sun slanting through the window. She had these eyes the color of sea-worn glass, and they missed nothing. "Show me," was all she'd said. Her voice a low, melodic thing that didn't ask, but simply expected. So I was showing her. I was demonstrating the delicate process of rebacking the spine, my hands usually steady, feeling like they belonged to a stranger. I was explaining the type of hide glue I use, the temperature, the pressure. I was talking too much. She was saying nothing, just watching, her presence a physical weight against my side. And then it happened. I reached for a bone folder. She shifted to see better, and the back of her hand brushed against the side of my wrist. The contact was a spark on dry tinder. My sentence faltered, died in my throat. My skin where she'd touched hummed as if struck. I didn't look at her. I stared at the book, at my own stupid, frozen hands. She didn't pull away immediately, a beat too long. A silent, shared acknowledgement of the sudden electric charge in the space between us. "Sorry," she murmured, her voice even lower now. "It's the static," I said, the lie pathetic and transparent in the humid summer air. From the cloth. I could feel her gaze on my profile. I could smell her perfume. Not sweet, but clean, like rain on cedar and something else, something uniquely her. "Of course," she replied, the two words layered with a meaning I couldn't quite grasp. Was it amusement, annoyance, or something else entirely? The silence that followed was a living thing. It was filled with the sound of our breathing, with the frantic hammering of my own heart. I chanced a glance at her. She was looking at my hands, not my face, her brow slightly furrowed. Her lower lip was caught gently between her teeth. It was the smallest of gestures, a tiny crack in her composed facade, and it undid me completely. I had to do something, say something, to break the tension that was pulling me taut as a bowstring. I picked up the book, my grip too tight. "The original spine is a lost cause," I said, my voice rough. "I'll have to craft a new one." And then, driven by a need I didn't understand, I did it. I took the corner of the fragile, beautiful dust jacket and, with a quiet, tearing sound, I deliberately ripped it. The sound was a gunshot in the quiet room. Elara's head snapped up, her sea-glass eyes wide, meeting mine for the first time without any filter. There was no grace, no calm. There was only pure, unadulterated shock. The front door of the workshop creaked open, the bell above it jingling with a cheap, cheerful sound that felt like a violation. We didn't look away from each other. The torn paper hung from my fingers, a confession. The spell was broken, but the charge in the air remained, crackling, dangerous, and alive. The customer was just a man looking for a quote on a water-damaged encyclopedia set. I gave him a price I knew was too high, my voice still unsteady. Elara had retreated to the far side of the workshop, pretending to examine a stack of marbled end papers. She didn't look at me once until the man left, the bell jingling his exit. The silence he left behind was heavier than before. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her back still to me. Her tone was neutral, carefully controlled. I looked down at the torn dust jacket. My shame was a hot, tight coil in my chest. "I don't know. That's not an answer." She turned then, and the vulnerability I saw in her eyes was a sharper blow than her anger would have been. It was the look of someone who was used to things being broken, and was disappointed to find another one. That was a first edition. It was precious. I know what it was. I ran my thumb over the ragged edge. "My ex-wife said I have a self-destructive streak. She said I ruin good things before they can disappoint me. The confession left my mouth before I could cage it. I never talked about Clara, the failure of that marriage, to a woman my own age who'd ultimately found me too quiet, too intense, was a private bruise. Elara was silent for a long moment. I could see her processing this, her gaze softening from disappointment to something more complex. I know the feeling, she said, so quietly I almost missed it. She looked away, out the window at the passing traffic. My husband, my ex-husband, preferred things that were new, shiny, uncomplicated. She gave a small, self-deprecating shrug. A woman with a past, it turns out, is just used goods. The raw honesty in her words, the shared language of past wreckage, closed the distance between us more than any step could. I moved then, coming to stand beside her at the workbench, not too close, but close enough to see the fine silver threads in her dark hair, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "You're not," I said, my voice low. She didn't look at me, but her shoulder, just for a second, brushed against my arm. A deliberate, fleeting pressure. "Neither are you, Leo." Her breath brushed against my cheek, a soft, warm caress. I could feel the pulse hammering in my throat. My hand rested on the workbench, inches from hers. The space between our little fingers felt charged, magnetic. I watched her gaze drop to my hand, then travel up my arm to my face. Her lips were slightly parted. The air was thick with everything we weren't saying, the fear of the age gap, the weight of social perception, the sheer, terrifying risk of wanting this. Slowly, hesitantly, I turned my hand over, palm up on the dusty wood between us. An invitation, a question. She stared at my open palm, her chest rising and falling with a breath that seemed to catch. Then, her fingers, delicate and cool, brushed against my wrist, tracing the path her hand had accidentally taken before. This time, it was no accident. Her touch was a whisper, a promise, a confession. It lasted only a second before she curled her fingers back into her own palm, but the ghost of it remained, searing my skin, a silent, electric bond forged in the quiet ruins of our pasts. The following week was a study in quiet torture. Elara came by the workshop every day, always with a reason, a new project, a question about paper grain, a book she thought I'd find interesting. The reasons were flimsy, and we both knew it. Today, she was holding a first-edition Wolf, her fingers tracing the embossed title on the cover. I was showing her a French stitching technique, my head bent close to hers over the book. Our shoulders were touching. The scent of her rain and cedar was all I could breathe. "So, the needle goes under the signature, like this," I murmured, my voice husky. My hand brushed against hers as I demonstrated the motion. A jolt, sharp and sweet, went straight up my arm. Her breath hitched. A tiny, almost inaudible sound. She didn't pull away. The front doorbell jingled. We sprang apart like guilty teenagers. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. It was just Mrs. Gable, the elderly owner of the antique shop next door, asking if I could look at a water-stained map. But the interruption was a bucket of cold reality. My face felt hot. I couldn't look at Elara. After Mrs. Gable left, the silence was different, charged with what had almost happened, and with the shame of being caught, even if we hadn't been. "This is..." Elara started, her voice unsteady. She wrapped her arms around herself. "Leo, this is... I know," I finished for her, finally meeting her gaze. The fear in her eyes mirrored my own. "The age thing, what people would say. They'd say I'm having a crisis," she whispered, a bitter twist to her mouth. "And they'd say you're confused." "I'm not confused." The words were out, blunt and absolute. Her eyes searched mine, looking for the lie, finding none. The air between us thickened, pulling taut. We were standing in the middle of the room, a good 3 feet apart, but it felt like inches. I took a step forward. She didn't retreat. Another step. I could see the rapid flutter of the pulse at the base of her throat. "Elara," I breathed, her name a prayer, a question. Her eyes drifted shut for a second, a silent war playing out on her features. When they opened, The longing in them was so raw it stole my breath. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. That was all the permission I needed. I closed the distance. My hand came up, my fingers trembling as they brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. Her skin was impossibly soft. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing again, a small, surrendering sigh escaping her lips. My other hand found the small of her back, drawing her in until our bodies were almost touching, separated only by a whisper of air and the thrumming tension of everything we were about to undo. I bent my head, my lips inches from hers. I could feel the warmth of her breath. And then her hands came up, not to pull me closer, but to press gently, hesitantly against my chest. A stop, a plea. We froze there, a statue of impossible desire, her hands a fragile barrier on my pounding heart. My face so close to hers I could count the faint lines at the corners of her eyes. The very lines that spoke of a life lived, the life that stood between us. We were breathing the same air, trapped in the space between a beginning and an end, closer than we had ever been, and further away than ever before. The dam broke on a Thursday, during a thunderstorm. Rain lashed against the workshop windows, trapping us inside a world of gray light and drumming water. Elara was supposed to be picking up the restored wolf. Instead, she was standing by the window, watching the downpour, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "The I told you so's would be deafening," she said, her voice barely louder than the rain. She wasn't talking about the weather. My friends. My daughter. She turned to face me, her expression stark. "She's only a few years younger than you, Leo." The mention of her daughter was a physical blow, a cold splash of the world outside our bubble. It was the one truth I couldn't argue with, the one piece of shame I couldn't erase. "I don't care about any of that," I said, the words feeling desperate and inadequate. "You should," she fired back, her composure cracking. "Because I do. I care that I look at you and I feel like a cliché. I care that every time I'm near you, I forget how to be a responsible adult. I forget that I have a life, a history, that doesn't include you." She was breathing heavily, her cheeks flushed. This was the confrontation we'd been circling for weeks. "What do you feel when you look at me, Elara?" I took a step toward her, the space between us charged with the storm's electricity. "Forget the clichés. Forget what anyone else thinks. Just tell me." She shook her head, a helpless gesture. "I can't. You can." I was in front of her now, close enough to see the tears she was refusing to shed glittering in her eyes. "Tell me." Her resolve shattered. "I feel seen," she whispered, the confession torn from her. "For the first time in years, I feel truly seen. And it terrifies me." That was it. The final thread of my control snapped. My hand came up, cupping her jaw, my thumb stroking the elegant line of her cheekbone. Her skin was fever warm. A tremor went through her, and she leaned into my touch, her eyes drifting shut. "Leo." My name was a sigh, a surrender. I bent my head, my lips close to her ear, my voice a low, rough whisper in the storm-filled room. "Let me see you," I breathed. "Let me." I felt her sway into me, her body aligning with mine, her hands coming up to clutch at the fabric of my shirt. The scent of rain on her skin, the feel of her slender frame against me. It was a dizzying, sensory overload. Every rational thought, every fear, was drowned out by the thunder and the pounding of my own heart. My other hand slid into her hair, tilting her face up to mine. Her lips were parted, her breath coming in quick, soft gasps against my mouth. Her eyes were wide, dark pools of want and fear. This was it, the point of no return. Our lips were a hair's breadth apart. I could almost taste her. The sharp, electronic buzz of her phone vibrating on the workbench shattered the moment like glass. We froze. Her eyes, which had been soft with surrender, widened in sudden, gut-wrenching panic. She pulled back as if burned. "It's my daughter," she choked out, staring at the screen as if it were a live wire. "She's early. She's outside." The air didn't just cool. It froze solid. Elara scrambled away from me, her movements jerky with panic. She smoothed her hair, her hands trembling visibly. "Don't say anything. Don't. Just don't." She fled to the door, pulling it open to reveal a young woman with a bright, impatient smile, huddled under an umbrella. "Mom, this place is impossible to find in this rain. Did you get the book?" I stood rooted to the spot, the ghost of her body still warm against mine. I could still feel the softness of her skin under my thumb. The contrast was brutal, almost sweetheart, just finalizing the details. Elara's voice was a strained imitation of its usual calm. She stepped back, holding the door, and her daughter, Chloe, breezed in, bringing the smell of wet pavement and youthful energy. Chloe's eyes, the same shape as her mother's but without their history, scanned the workshop with casual curiosity before landing on me. Her smile was friendly, open. "Hey, you must be Leo. Mom says you're a miracle worker with books." She was 24. Elara had told me that once. The number hung in the air between us, a verdict. My throat was too tight to speak. I just nodded, a stiff, awkward movement. Elara moved to the workbench to retrieve the wolf, her path taking her unnecessarily close to me. As she brushed past, her hip grazed mine. It wasn't an accident. It was a secret, desperate point of contact in the blinding light of exposure. A silent scream in the middle of a conversation. My body reacted before my mind could. A jolt of pure, undiluted want that shamed me. I saw her flinch, ever so slightly, as if she'd felt it too. "Here it is," Elara said, her voice too bright as she handed the book to her daughter. Chloe took it, chattering about the dinner reservations she'd made. "It's that new place I was telling you about. You'll love it. Much better than hiding away in your dusty old study all the time." The words were innocent, but they landed like blows. Hiding away. That's what we were doing. What I was. A secret, dusty indulgence. Elara's eyes met mine over her daughter's shoulder. The raw, unguarded truth was there for a single, searing second. It wasn't just fear I saw. It was shame. A deep, corrosive shame that I was its source. Chloe turned to leave, pulling her mother by the arm. "Come on, Mom. The meter's running." Elara allowed herself to be led, a graceful woman being shepherded by her child. At the door, she paused and looked back at me. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no sound came out. It was a look of utter helplessness. The door closed behind them. Silence. The only sound was the relentless rain and the frantic beating of my own heart. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had just held her, that had felt the weight of her surrender. Now they felt like instruments of ruin. The decision solidified in my gut, cold and hard. This couldn't be a secret. This couldn't be something she was ashamed of. I wouldn't be her dirty secret. I had to end it, or I had to make it everything. For 3 days I didn't see her. I didn't call. The workshop felt like a tomb, the ghost of her perfume clinging to the old paper and wood. I was resolved. Let it end. It was the right thing, the only sane thing. Then, on the 4th evening, I heard the soft tap on the glass of the locked door. She stood there in the twilight, no coat, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. She looked older, the lines of worry around her eyes more pronounced. She looked real. I unlocked the door and stepped back, letting her in. The air was instantly thick with everything we hadn't said. "You've been avoiding me," she said, her voice quiet. "Yes. Why?" I turned away, unable to look at her while I said it. "Because I saw it in your eyes when your daughter was here. The shame. I won't be the thing you're ashamed of, Elara." She was silent for a long moment. I heard her take a step closer. "You misunderstood." "Did I?" I turned back, my voice rough. "You looked at me like I was a mistake you were about to make." "No," she closed the distance between us until we were standing inches apart in the dim light. Her eyes were fierce, glistening. "I was ashamed of myself, for caring what anyone else thought, for being afraid of something that feels this real." Her gaze dropped to my mouth, then back to my eyes. "For wanting you so much it feels like a physical ache, and being too much of a coward to admit it." The confession hung in the air, raw and breathtaking. My resolve shattered. I reached for her, my hand cupping the back of her neck, my fingers tangling in her soft hair. A shuddering breath escaped her, and she leaned into me, her body aligning with mine, her hands coming to rest on my chest. I could feel the frantic beat of her heart under my palm. "Tell me to stop," I whispered, my forehead resting against hers, our breath mingling. "Tell me this is a mistake, and I'll let you go. I'll never mention it again." She didn't speak. Instead, she rose onto her toes, closing the last fraction of an inch between us. Her lips brushed against mine, once, twice. A question, a whisper, a test. It was the quietest, most devastating sound I'd ever heard. A surrender, a beginning. I kissed her back. It wasn't frantic or desperate. It was slow and deep and heartbreakingly tender. A conversation without words. Her hands slid up to my shoulders, holding on as if I were the only solid thing in a spinning world. My arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against me, and she melted into the embrace, a small, broken sound of relief catching in her throat. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing raggedly. The silence in the room was different now. Not empty, but full. She rested her head against my shoulder, her face buried in my neck. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered into my skin. And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of old books and her hair, with the weight of her in my arms, I understood her completely. And she me. 6 months later, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the workshop window in silent, white lace. Inside, the world was warm. The single desk lamp cast a soft, golden pool over the two of us, curled together on the old leather sofa I dragged in for this very purpose. Elara's head rested on my shoulder, her legs tucked up beneath her. One of my hands was laced with hers, our fingers intertwined on my chest, rising and falling with my breath. My other hand held a book, but I hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. I was too absorbed in the weight of her, the scent of her shampoo, the simple, profound rightness of her presence. Her daughter, Chloe, knew about us now. It had been awkward, a conversation filled with long pauses and difficult questions. But it had been honest. And in the end, Chloe had shrugged and said, "If he makes you happy, Mom, then he's okay by me." The world hadn't ended. The whispers, if they existed, stayed far from our door. Elara shifted, tilting her head back to look at me. The lines around her eyes were still there, but they now seemed to be etched from laughter, not from worry. She no longer looked at me with panic or shame. She just looked at me, as Leo. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice a sleepy murmur. I looked from the falling snow outside to her face in the lamplight. "I'm thinking that I used to believe in fixing things that were broken," I said, my thumb stroking the back of her hand. "But you weren't broken. You were just waiting, and I wasn't fixing you. I was just coming home." Her eyes softened, a sheen of tears that didn't fall. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She simply lifted her head and pressed her lips to mine in a kiss that was as gentle and certain as the snow piling up outside. It was a kiss that held all the quiet confessions, the shared fears, and the hard-won peace we'd found. When she settled back against my shoulder with a contented sigh, I set the book aside and pulled the wool blanket higher over us. We sat like that for a long time, watching the snow blanket the world in silence, our hands still entwined. There were no more questions between us, no more tension. Just the warm, steady certainty of two people who had chosen each other, not in spite of their history, but because of it. The story wasn't about an ending. It was about this quiet, perfect beginning. Did you feel the chemistry between Leo and Elara? What kind of stories would you like to hear next? Let us know in the comments below.